How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed, and today I wanted to rank all of the 5e modules as of the current time of this recording. We have a nice selection of modules here, and something to note is as I'm ranking all these modules, I'm going to be ranking them from worst to best, and we're going to see here that if it's on the far left of the tier, then it is higher than what is on the right side. Something else to note is I am going to tell you straight off the bat, there is no module in here that earns a 10 out of 10. Not a single one. Every single module in it has just something wrong with it. Something that you need to do. But how I'm going to be judging all of these is I'm going to say that the ones that are at the top require the least amount of work to have an awesome experience, and the ones at the bottom require a lot of work to have an awesome experience. Every single one of these modules does have an amazing story to tell. Every single one of these modules you can have an absolute fantastic time with, but some of them you are going to have to work harder than others. And as you can tell here at the bottom, I've jumped up all of the modules. They're not in any specific order, not in date or any sort of ranking, whatever. I'm just going to be hopping right into all of these and just giving my personal opinions. Starting off here, we have Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Before I move Dungeon of the Mad Mage, let me just give you a brief synopsis on it. Dungeon of the Mad Mage is all about delving into not a mega dungeon, but the mega dungeon. It is absolutely freaking enormous. This place is just huge. There is dozens of layers underneath Waterdeep, and your players can just trudge through it all. There is so many things going right with it in regards of all the awesome biomes you get to go into, all the factions you get to interact with, all of the amazing things that you can get up to there. But as much as I'm praising it right now, I am going to tell you it's definitely going to be lower here. I'm just going to start off by putting it on a C here. And the reason for that is, as a module, it sucks. Here's why. If you wanted to run this thing purely as written, that is going to take you at the bare minimum 3 years if you're playing once a week. To my knowledge, I've interacted with a bunch of people in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage community. To my knowledge, as of right now, there's only been a handful of people, and I'm talking about like you can count on one hand, amount of people that have actually ran that module as written and completed it. So I'm going to tell you though, there is a lot of crazy awesome things you can do with it. You can run it as one shots. You can just have it be a set of mini shots where you're just covering one floor of that dungeon. But running it as a full campaign, it is going to require a lot of work for you to have a fun time of it, because it's just going to be such a long time. I think that nowadays we're seeing a lot of people want to transition to a shorter campaign. At least I hope so. I like shorter campaigns better anyway. But for you to run Dungeon of the Mad Mage, that's going to be 100+ sessions. It's going to be a long time. Next up here, we have Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd, of course, is just the module, right? Everybody loves it. Everyone knows it. It's got this iconic face. It's got the iconic name. It's got the location. Heck, we just got a supplementary book that even details out all around the lands of Barovia and all about Strahd and whatnot. So there's obviously a reason why Strahd is one of the best. And of course, I am going to be putting it as one of the best ones here. The module itself to run is not that difficult in regards of trying to weave a story out of it. You just dump your players in a sandbox and the story just finds itself. Your players are going to forge that own story. Is there some things you need to change? Absolutely, yes. There is some things that you need to work out. This is definitely not a module I would recommend to newer DMs, specifically brand new DMs, because there is some things that may get lost in the text there. There is a lot of reading involved. Dropping your players in a sandbox does mean you have to prep a lot more if you're not entirely sure of where they're going. But Curse of Strahd itself is just an absolute fantastic piece of work, and there's just so many great things you can do with it. And of course, the community behind it really helps it too. If you join those Discords and those subreddits, you are going to be finding so much information about how to run it and things you can add to it and things you should take away from it that you'll not be left wanting for any more. There's more than enough. Next up, we have Descent into Avernus. So Descent into Avernus is, for some reason, it's got this tacked on name of Baldur's Gate. I'm going to tell you, They shouldn't have done that. Descent into Avernus has a weird pacing to it. Your players start off in Baldur's Gate, and there's just, quite frankly, no need for it. I think they just tacked on the name purely because of the Baldur's Gate game coming out. I'm willing to bet that's the case. But it's all about going to hell, and the hell part is fun. There's a lot of cool things you can do in Avernus. There is a lot of themes to explore there. But unfortunately, I'm going to say that because Baldur's Gate takes up too much of a chunk of the adventure, and the fact that there is some pacing issues involved with Avernus in regards of your players can only go to certain locations, and very, very importantly is the fact that it's a dark campaign. And if you have people that want a lighter campaign, you're going to have to change up a lot. You're going to have to change up quite a bit. And I think changing up hell to be not as light kind of defeats the whole purpose of it. So unfortunately for me, Descent into Avernus is going to be on the lower tier here. But the question is it in fact lower than Dungeon of the Mad Mage? You know, honestly, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say Dungeon of the Mad Mage does require more work to make it a fun adventure, purely because Dungeon of the Mad Mage requires so long in order to run. But Descent to Avernus, you could theoretically run it as written and have a pretty short adventure, but you just got to blaze through that beginning part and get to the fun stuff. Next up, we have Princes of the Apocolypse. This one is dealing all with cults in the Desireen Valley, and it's all about going into these mega dungeons, and it's all about going to these fun flavor of the week locations all around this map that you get to explore. Princes of the Apocolypse is obviously early on in the development cycle of D&D 5e modules. You can clearly tell that by the vernacular that they use, by the art that they use, and most important of all, the pacing and style. The writing is honestly the biggest issue with it. There is some things that you need to read this book entirely in order to get, which I find is not very conducive to having a fun adventure. The fact that you have to pour over the entirety, hundreds and hundreds of this pages of this book in order to get the full grasp of what's going on and to make it run smoothly does suck, especially if you are a newer DM and don't want to read all that. Heck, even veteran DMs don't want to read all that, right? Sometimes you just want to read a few pages, be able to get a location and get a sense of what's going on and run it. So for me personally, Descent into, or Prince of the Apocalypse is going to get a lower rating here. Man, that's a tough one. I've never had a good time with Prince of the Apocalypse. I know some people have. I know some people have had a great time of it. But I'm willing to bet that everyone that has had a great time of it has played in a homebrewed version of it. In regards of having it be a actual rules as written module, I think you're going to be sorely missing stuff. You're going to have to be putting in quite a lot of work there. I genuinely don't know exactly what goes wrong with Prince of the Apocalypse and me and everyone that I talk to about running it more raw. But there's just the dungeons, I think. I think the dungeons are a really big issue. You have to keep on going into these dungeons again and again and again. And you got this weird pacing with all the other cults going on. It's a weird adventure. I'm going to say that you have to do a lot of work to make it a fun adventure. And that's not exactly what you want out of an adventure module. Sometimes you just want to pick up the module, read it, and run it. Next up, we have Ghost of Saltmarsh, the second anthology that came for the 5th edition. This one covers a lot of nautical-themed adventures and covers the classics. And the cool thing about this anthology is the fact that it gives us a location. It gives us the hub, Saltmarsh itself. And because they give us that hub to quest out of, there is just, it connects all the adventures in it. And we'll be getting into all the other anthologies later on, of course, but the great thing about this one is the fact that the setting is just so great and thematic. It works perfectly. I am definitely putting Ghost of Saltmarsh higher up. I'm going to not put it exactly in the top tier categories, but it's definitely right there on the edge. And the reason for that is because one of the adventures in there, or I'd say 1.5 of the adventures in there, are not exactly great when they convert to 5e. Something important to remember is of Tales from the Yawning Portal and Ghost of Saltmarsh, those adventures are purely ripped from older editions of D&D, whether they be first edition, second edition, third, fourth, and I think one of them's the D&D next from Ghost of Saltmarsh. But the thing to consider is when you have those old adventures using those old systems, those systems were basically telling a tale. They were basically setting the tone and theme. And when you have 5th edition thrown in there, some of that tone is sort of lost. Some of it's kind of thrown away. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, 5e is just a straight up different system than the older editions. But not all adventures can be converted perfectly. You can obviously swap monsters from an older stat block to a newer stat block, but the actual feel and tone of the game are changed. So the majority of the adventures, I will say, are actually perfectly fine in 5e, but just, like I said, 1.5 of them, I just don't think they work out that well. Next up, Out of the Abyss. Out of the Abyss is an absolute favorite of mine because that is actually how I started my D&D career. This is the first adventure I actually played in, so I definitely have extremely fond memories of Out of the Abyss. The setting is great underneath all of the world in the Underdark. With a lot of these adventures, we see this reoccurring theme of operating in the Sword Coast and operating in the Sword Coast. And, it repeats itself. Thankfully, with this adventure, you don't have to worry about any of that. The adventure entirely takes place underground, and there's a lot of fun locations underground. A lot of different biomes, a lot of different factions you get to interact with, and there's this, in the very beginning of the game, is all about your players getting captured and then trying to escape, and that's a really fun theme that you can draw upon for pretty much anything, right? Like, the group is joined together by a common cause of trying to get away, being, captured by the evil beings and trying to make it back up to the surface. That's a really great hook. However, the second half of the adventure I don't think is as great of a hook. While the first half is all about you trying to escape, the second half is all about you trying to fight. And I think escaping is a lot more fun. I think, just getting into a good old-fashioned brawl is sort of more boring. It's not exactly, the most exciting thing. There's a lot of other adventures where you get into a straight up fight, but there's very few adventures where you start off as convicts trying to get away from the evil people. So that already marks it down right there. In addition to that, Out of the Abyss is, once again, early on in their development cycle. It clearly shows in the writing. There is a very famous part of the book where if your players go from one scene to the next, you as a DM are gonna have to flip 30 whole pages to see where they go. It's so odd, They structured the book really oddly. The adventures don't exactly, align with one another. But I'm here to tell you that if you're willing to put in the effort, it is an amazing adventure, and I absolutely endorse everybody running this adventure. But what I'm gonna say is you are gonna have to put in a bunch of work for it. And unfortunately, as a ranking, it is going to be low. I'm going to be putting it higher than a Descent into Avernus, but it is not exactly up there in regards of best written modules, in my opinion. Next up, we have Candlekeep Mysteries, the newest in this whole lineup, which is, of course, going to change soon. We've got 2 more adventures coming out at some point. But Candlekeep Mysteries is the third anthology of this series. However, this does not take adventures from older editions of D&D. This was 17 different adventures. Not 17, not even adventures. It's 17 different writers that all came together and made mini-shots or one-shots for your players to go around, and they're all keyed and themed around Candlekeep, and specifically about books. All the adventures have some book tied to them, and your players get roped into the adventure in one way, shape, or form. Some of them involves them getting the quest from somebody. Some of them involves them getting sucked into the book. Some of them just involve them needing to go out there to solve the mystery, and the book is just there to give them some information or whatever. I'm here to tell you, of those 17 adventures in that book they're so good. They're so great. You can run them as one-shots. You can run this book as a full campaign, although if you're going to run it as a full campaign, you're going to have to put in a lot of work for it. And also, very importantly, is you could just take these adventures and slap them into any adventure of your own, whether it be homebrew or any other module that you're running. There's a lot of flavor. There's a lot of variability in it. The book itself is absolutely awesome. The majority of the adventures are good. There is, unfortunately, some of them try to do the same thing, but some do them a little bit better. And then there's one adventure where it's not really much of a mystery. But overall, the overall product is good. I seriously had a blast running them, and I can't wait to run them some more. I don't think I'm ever going to run them as a full-blown adventure because, one, that's not in the book, but I homebrew all the stuff anyway, so that doesn't really matter. But what does matter is the fact that we're given these adventures, and there is absolutely no string at all whatsoever to connect all the adventures other than the fact that your players just so happen to be in Candlekeep. I feel like there could have been a lot more expansion on the Candlekeep portion itself. I think that the book is totally awesome, and I think it is definitely going to be higher up there. Not exactly the highest, but it does what it does well. It didn't show up to be a game-breaking, absolutely mind-shattering adventure. It didn't sign up for that, right? It signed up to be 17 different little adventures for you to plant into any adventure that you want or to run as one-shots. And for that, it does it well. But it's not exactly all that great. And another criticism of it is because it was written by 17 different people, the formatting is different for every single adventure, which is off-putting for some. I personally don't mind as much, but I know a lot of people do. Next up, we have Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. So this adventure definitely was a splash in the community because a lot of people were expecting horror. And unfortunately for them, their expectations were somewhat shattered. As there's this, first, I don't know why this happened. There was a lot of buildup for Icewind Dale to be this horror adventure about you going up into the frigid north and it's cold and dark and miserable and there's monsters and it's scary. And unfortunately, the book doesn't exactly lay that out for you in any sort of way. The darkness that's all around, a lot of people simply forget about because it's a throwaway line. The adventure in regards of the monsters isn't really all that scary because, it's 5e. 5e and horror don't exactly go hand in hand. People can pull it off, but more often than not, people don't. Obviously, another huge issue with it too is, as written, the first chapter, the whole Icewind Dale itself, where you're exploring around and doing quests for people and getting involved in the all around the location, absolute meme grinder. Absolute. If you run this thing purely as written and you do not take your foot off the gas and you're running encounters exactly as they should be ran, you're going to have dead PCs mounting up. You're going to have a huge pile of poor character sheets. And unfortunately, that is not something that a lot of people like. It is an absolute just a clown fiesta in how deadly the first few chapters are. In fact, honestly, if you're running it as written, the first, I'd say, 4 chapters are extremely deadly. It really comes down to how aggressive you are as a DM in regards of running creatures exactly as they should. And also very important is the fact that your players could wander off out into the wilderness chasing after something, and guess what? They're in the middle of the frozen tundra and bad things can happen to them. Another big criticism of Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden is the fact that it is not one big adventure. It is 3 adventures basically slapped together. There's this sandbox portion, and then there's a portion dealing with one faction, and then there's this other portion where you are supposed to pull off a heist maybe, and then you go and sneak around in some area maybe. But depending on how you actually read that, it can shape up so many different ways. I have so many recommendations of that, and of course I've done a huge series on Rime of the Frostmaiden. But what I'm going to say is, I love the adventure. I can't wait to run it some more. I have had an absolute blast with it. But as an adventure itself, it's not exactly the best thing. It's definitely got some pacing issues. It's got some challenge difficulty issues. It's got a tone issue. I think that they should have leaned more in on the horror. But as speculated by many people, I think a lot of people believe that the horror was let off because Van Richten's Guide to Everything came out. I don't know if I believe that or not. All I know is if you want to run that thing as intended, or at least as I think it should be intended, then you definitely need to start leaning into the darkness and the horror. So I'm definitely going to put this in the middle of the pack there. I definitely think that it's worth running, but you're going to have to get some elbow grease in there. You're going to have to make that thing shine. Lost Mine of Phandelver. The starter adventure. This is the adventure. This is the thing that kicked off everything. This is the adventure that is just so classic to 5th edition. A good chunk of the community has played it. I don't know if at this point that's the case anymore because it is an older adventure and we're getting more and more people new into the game. But for a lot of people, this was one of the beginning games that you're played in or ran or whatever. The adventure itself is fun. It's a nice little sandbox. You get to explore around the town of Phandalin and go around exploring Phandelver. And there's a lot of fun locations to dive into. It's a level 1 to 5 adventure, so you're not dealing with the trouble of world-shattering events. You're not dealing with evil liches, and you're not dealing with ancient dragons and stuff. It's just a nice, quaint adventure. And for that, it serves its purpose extremely well. I will say, though, there is, for as awesome as it is, the very first encounter in the entire game, the first encounter for 5th edition, in fact, because that was the beginning adventure for 5e, is an absolute slaughter as your players go up against goblins. Now, before you start actually laughing, goblins, oh boo-hoo, goblins are actually insanely difficult at level 1. At level 1, they have 15 AC, meaning that on average, if you've got a +4, you've only got a 50-50 chance of hitting a goblin. And a lot of goblins are probably going to require 2 hits to kill. Goblins can, however, shoot you a bunch, and they can move around, and they can, shoot and attack and do whatever else. So the goblin ambush right in the beginning of the adventure is absolutely disgusting, and if you're going to run this adventure, you need to change that aspect of it. But other than that, the adventure is absolutely awesome, and it's definitely getting a higher tier of all these books. It's not exactly the best because it's only level 1 to 5. It's not grandiose in scale. It's not trying to absolutely, lead you on into the most epic campaign ever of all time. But it is a fun campaign to run. All of the NPCs you get to interact with, the locations you get to explore around. Just an absolute fun time. And when you know it, on that little random jumbling there, we also got the other starter adventure, the Dragon of Icespire Peak. Basically, this is an air quote sequel to the Lost Mines of Phandelver. It is not a sequel that you run after it, but it's basically taking place in the exact same location, but you go to different areas and explore different things. And it's actually, once again, just an amazing product. I think that this one now is probably getting played a lot by newer players because the Essentials kit is just so great for newer players and DMs to get because it comes with a bunch of free stuff. It's got all the, the dice and, everything else. It's absolutely awesome. The Dragons of Icespire Peak is a fun adventure to run. There is, once again, just a nice little sandbox you get to explore around in. And it also actually deals with that dragon. Your players get to chase around a dragon. Of course, if they're low level, this is going to be an absolute nightmare, but that's part of the adventure is you run around and you deal with all of the dragons and terrible, damage that's wreaking, and your players get a little bit better and they get to have some fun time. It is another well-put product. It's not knocking out of the park in regards of grandiose scale, but it's not trying to. It's level 1 to 5 adventure, and it's perfectly fine. The real question for me is, do I put Icespire Peak, the Dragons of Icespire Peak, in front of Lost Mine of Phandelver? Me personally, I am going to say that's honestly a tough one. I think Lost Mine beats it out just a hair because of the. Actually, I'm kind of like 50-50 on this. I refuse to put I refuse to put them, side by side or, on top of each other. One of them is definitely going to be better than the other. And I'm probably going to have to say Lost Mine beats it out, but like by a hair. Like I'm saying like Lost Mine is a 51 and Icespire Peak is a 49. It's barely there, it's so close. But it's still an amazing adventure, a really fun little low-level romp that I highly recommend you check out if you're into low-level stuff. Tales from the Yawning Portal, the first anthology series that covered basically just a hodgepodge of really famous adventures from games of old. While Ghost of Saltmarsh had a nautical theme going on, this one doesn't have a theme going on. The only air quote theme to it is that they're dungeons. They're all basically dealing with not mega dungeons, but big dungeons. And they're awesome. I love every single one of the adventures in that product. It's got the classics. The Sunless Citadel is an all-time favorite of a lot of people's. It's got the Tomb of Horrors, which is the penultimate, the classico, absolute awesome best dungeon ever made of all time. Regardless of what people say about how they hate it, that's the idea of it. You're supposed to hate it, right? I know a lot of people rag on Tomb of Horrors for its lethality and its trolliness and its zany wackiness, but that's what it was designed for, and for that it does it well. In regards to the whole product itself, Tales from the Yawning Portal, really awesome. We get those 7 adventures, and they take us all over the place. They show off what made those old school modules so awesome, and even one of the newer ones, Dead and Thay there. But the thing is unfortunately, we get absolutely no connector at all whatsoever for making this a full-blown adventure. And even though it's called Tales from the Yawning Portal, we get exactly like 4 pages about the Yawning Portal. And I'm saying like that's a very small portion. There's very, very little that actually deals with the Yawning Portal. In fact, it's really funny too, because it's called Tales from the Yawning Portal, and yet none of the adventures actually deal with the Yawning Portal. So I feel like that was sort of not necessarily misleading, but definitely odd. Obviously, this came out long before Waterdeep, Dragon Heist, and Dungeon of the Mad Mage, so I don't know if they had those games in the development cycle yet, but maybe they did, I don't know. In regards of the product itself, it's definitely going up there. It's sadly for me going behind Ghost of Saltmarsh, even though I prefer the majority of all of the adventures in the Tomb, the Tales from the Yawning Portal, more than Ghost of Saltmarsh. Ghost of Saltmarsh, what it provides is not only a location, but also ways to connect the adventure, and the setting itself is just absolutely fantastic in Ghost of Saltmarsh. There is no setting in Tales from the Yawning Portal. It is just 7 adventures you slap into any existing game, or you run them as one-shots. You could run these things as a full-blown adventure, the entire thing, but you're going to have to come up with some elaborate excuse on why people are going to these crazy elaborate dungeons. That's not that hard of a sell, of course, if you just say, oh, you're, mercenaries, you're adventurers, go. That's easy, but... I think that nowadays a lot of people want more riveting, excitement there. Tomb of Annihilation. So Tomb of Annihilation, we're talking about old school adventures. Tomb of Annihilation is actually sort of a hodgepodge of 3 older adventures, and of course retrofitted for the 5th edition and slapped with a whole bunch of other different motifs. And I absolutely love it. Tomb of Annihilation has it all. It covers the 3 pillars of D&D so well. You have the exploration in the jungle that's yearning to be explored. You have the roleplay with the awesome denizens of not only Port Nine Zaru, but of course many of the denizens in the jungles itself. And you have the combat of you're going up against awesome deadly foes, and of course right there at the grand finale you're going up against the craziest nonsensical madness. I absolutely love it. The thing is I know a lot of people do not like the hex crawl portion of it, and once again that does come down to the fact that it is 5e, and unfortunately 5e and hex crawls do not go hand in hand. They don't make any sense as written. It doesn't matter if you get into 3 encounters in a day. If you just sleep it off, then the next day you go and explore around some more. The encounters don't really matter. So what I would recommend is if you want to make this a more hardcore campaign, you have to change up the rest rules some way, somehow. Of course, there's a lot of different ways you can go about that. But the product itself, I'm going to tell you, is absolutely amazing. It provides just so many fonts of inspiration for making a exploration-based adventure, for showing off awesome locations, for showing off the tonality change between role-playing in a city, exploring a deadly jungle, diving into ruins, and it covers all that so well. And I truly do believe, in my heart of hearts, that Tomb of Annihilation is the cream of the crop there. And yes, that is above Curse of Strahd. And the reason for that is because Curse of Strahd has this issue of this overbearing bad guy that can just do whatever the frick he wants, and you have to put the reins on him. But Tomb of Annihilation doesn't have that. There is, of course, the pacing issue that your players may believe that they have to do something quickly, and thus the hex crawl is negated because they have to explore around in a quick time, and then they can't go to any fun locations. But if you, once again, nothing on this list is a 10 out of 10. For Tomb of Annihilation, I think just an easy change to make that an awesome adventure is to just get rid of that timer and just have a fun time in the jungles. Absolutely amazing product. I absolutely love it. And now on to the Tyranny of the Dragons. So I lumped the two dragon adventures together, the Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, because Wizards of the Coast, they lumped them together as well by making the thing just accessible in one book. And it was, once again, early in their development cycle. And I'm glad they realized that this wasn't going to work out in regards of making sequels, because that's lame, right? If they had made adventures again and again that were sequels and, prequels and whatever the frick else, that would mean that you'd have to buy into more products, and that's something that a lot of people are willing to do. And of course, not everyone's got time to run all these adventures. Every single adventure should be its own self-contained adventure. So I'm glad that they realized that there's not going to be any more sequels. Of course, the only air quote sequel we have so far after that is Dungeons of the Mad Mage, but that's not really a sequel. So Tyranny of Dragons, you get to deal with dragons, right? It is a quintessential D&D adventure. You go into dungeons and you fight dragons. It covers that excellently. You go up against a bunch of dragons, you get a bunch of loot, you go to the next location, you beat up someone else, you repeat process. It is a railroaded adventure, but if you're okay with having a railroaded adventure, it's a good time. But there is a lot of things wrong with the pacing. In Horde of the Dragon Queen in particular, there's one famous chapter where you basically do nothing, and a lot of people don't like it. And Rise of Tiamat, I will say, just absolutely starts going into the gonzo of your players are going, just punching up against super awesome enemies, which is awesome. And they go from just low-level nobodies in Horde of the Dragon Queen, and by the end of Rise of Tiamat, they are leading factions and armies and duking it out with ancient evil foes and stuff, and it's just absolutely awesome. But it's definitely needs a lot of touching up. The writing is boring in a lot of locations. There is just a lot of reading involved, and once again, that's just not something that everybody wants to get up to. And I truly do believe that you can have too much of something. You can have too much of dragon fighting. You can have too much of fighting the same cultist band over and over again. So trying to add some variety in there is honestly the best way to fix that. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and say that it's definitely right there in the middle. It's not the worst, but it requires some love if you want to make it truly shine, and it definitely can shine. As mentioned before, every single one of these adventures is well worth running. You just have to make it work. Storm King's Thunder is, without a shadow of a doubt, out of all these, the most expansive in regards of where you can go and what you can do. It is not a sandbox, it is a beach. It's not even a beach, it is a desert. You plop your players in the desert and you say, okay, where do you go? And unfortunately, what I've both seen and heard from a lot of people running this adventure is the fact that you plop your players in this desert and they're looking around and they don't know exactly where to go. And what I've actually come to find is a lot of people like Storm King's Thunder, not because of the adventure itself. They like it because they're going around and doing random things. The adventure itself should be all about fighting the giants and trying to quell their destructive nature and trying to restore balance to the savage frontier. But what ends up happening for a lot of people is, as they're running this adventure, they do a little bit of that, and then they get to some like downtime activities and start, doing a whole bunch of little side quests here and there. And I think that it's really funny that it comes down to that. It comes down to the fact that a lot of people have fun with this adventure, not with the giant portion of it, which makes me think they should have probably dissected this adventure, right? They probably should have had a more giant focused adventure, and then they should have had an adventure that's all about exploration and downtime activity of the game. I think that Storm King's Thunder is definitely an awesome adventure, and I definitely like the theme of the giants. The fact that every single one of the giants has something that they're getting up to, and the way you go about fighting them or dealing with them, talking to them, the way your players can approach these things are just numerous, and the end finale is absolutely insane. There's so many variables, and there is just such an epic climatic conclusion. But once again, there is a huge issue with the fact that by the third chapter, I believe it is, chapter 3, yeah, you plop your players in this ginormous sandbox and say, okay, what do you do? Where do you go? And unfortunately, if they aren't exactly fully versed in the D&D world, they may not fully understand, they may not care about certain locations. So I am going to say that Storm King's Thunder definitely is going up here in the middle. Does it go above Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, though? That's a tough one, because with Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, that's mentioned before, that's 3 different story beats in one. Storm King's Thunder is one adventure, it's one story beat in regards to dealing with the giants, but then just like the other portion of the adventure is not even actual story, it's just more just like little side quests and stuff. That's a tough one, honestly. I definitely know Storm King's is going above Tyranny of Dragons, without a shadow of a doubt. But does it get its place above there? I'm going to have to say... Oh, man, this is a tough one. I'm going to have to say Icewind Dale is going to unfortunately stay behind Storm King's Thunder. Even though I personally love Icewind Dale. But I personally love Icewind Dale because I've changed enough of it to make it exactly what I want it to be and what I think it should have intended to be. Storm King's Thunder, I think it intended to be just this big old sandbox, and your players are just doing whatever the heck they want, and that's okay. There's not this oppressive time limit like in the background as some of the adventures have. There's not these world-ending, shattering things going on. But I feel like there should have been in Storm King's Thunder, but there isn't. It's just one of those things. But it's definitely a great adventure. It's definitely a fun jaunt around the land and just having a fun time fighting giants. And last but certainly not least on the list here, we have Dragon Heist. Waterdeep Dragon Heist is an absolute beloved one of mine. I both played in it and ran it multiple times, and the city is just so awesome. Waterdeep is this metropolitan, just awesome place. It is the jewel of the Sword Coast. There's so many things you can do with this adventure, because with what we see with like almost every single one of these adventures, your players are going around the world. They're going around a massive chunk of land, and they're doing things. In none of these other adventures are you staying in one city the whole time and interacting with these same NPCs the whole time, and not not going off in the middle of nowhere for long periods of time. Waterdeep Dragon Heist excels in the fact that it is a nice, comfy place. Your players actually get a dwelling, which is something that some of the other adventures here do have the semblance of getting your own little dwelling, but Waterdeep Dragon Heist really hits it over the head by giving you an awesome place to call your own and really cements you into the location. The NPCs that your players get to interact with are so lively. They make the city absolutely come to life, and some of them bring death into the city as well. And That's, and the unfortunate part I will say is it being a level 1 to 5 adventure, your players aren't punching up super hard, but the game potentially expects you to punch above your pay grade, as your players could be potentially going up against incredibly powerful beings, incredibly powerful. Like, they could be going up against just insane monsters, which no low-level party could possibly beat. It's impossible. Like, statistically impossible. But the way they go about it is, this is not a, you should really emphasize with this adventure is, this is not a grognardian beat 'em up adventure. This is more of a fun Cowboy Bebop style adventure where you're trying to get the best of people and always ducking out of harm's way and always running away from people and then chasing after people. It's not about getting into one big epic brawl and then beating them up. Of course not. It's the middle of the city. You can't do that. You have to think of this adventure not like the murder hobo adventures that you have with every other one of these adventures. It is a true city adventure. And I'm gonna say, you know, I absolutely love it. Heck, I went to the reveal stream of this when people actually went out and did things. But my goodness, is there some issues in it in regards of, this is almost as close to a roller coaster adventure as anything else on this list. There is a lot of times where you need your players to go to a location. You need your players to chase after this. You need to give your players this piece of information. It's not even a railroad at some points. You have to push your players along, or else the adventure just simply doesn't happen. And some people are going to, if you try to push them, just put their feet in the dirt and say, no, I'm not moving, which is unfortunate. If you have people that buy into it, then it's going to be a fun time. But of course, you can run into those people that do not want that. Waterdeep Dragon Heist is definitely going higher up there, though. I love the just simplicity of it. Hey, your players show up to the city. Oh, hey, your players get wrapped up in a quest for gold. Oh, hey, your players just so happen to be able to be at the right place at the right time, and it all lines up. I love it. It's just super nice, super simple, super fun. You can run this just as is, and I think it's perfectly fine. But of course, it's got a nice little community tie behind it that make the adventure more fleshed out. And of course, the Alexandrian remix of it. You know, the adventure itself, I think, is totally awesome. And it's not exactly the biggest and best thing, I'll say. Of course, there is some issues in regards of, it doesn't allow players that too much freedom, because if there's too much freedom, then, you know, once again, the story is just lost. But of course, if your players are happy with the adventure that's laid out in front of them, then it's a fun time. And just like that, that is apparently my listings here. I didn't come in this with any preconceived notions. I basically just showed up and did this. So working from, you know, top to bottom here, left to right, we have TOA is number 1, Curse of Strahd number 2, Phandelver 3, Icespire Peaks 4, goes to Saltmarsh 5, Yawning Portal 6, Candlekeep 7, Dragon Heist 8, Storm Kings 9, Icewind Dale. I'm losing count already, but you get the picture. The funny thing is I'm doing this a little too early, because in a few months we're actually going to have 2 more adventures, and I'm curious to see how they shake up. I certainly can't wait to run those, because Fey Adventures and Strixhaven, they sound like an absolutely fun time to me. I'm going to tell you, as I've mentioned numerous times here, is every single one of these books is worth running. Every single one. Every single one of these has an amazing story to tell, awesome locations to explore, awesome NPCs to meet, awesome just everything about them. The reason why I gave gradings to how they did is because of how they were formatted, how they're laid out, some pieces of information that were vitally missing. And the case of Dungeon of the Mad Mage, of course, just the fact that it'll take you 27 years in order to actually complete if you run it as is. There is just amazing adventures to run with these. But you gotta sit down. You gotta sink your fangs into the books. You gotta read these things completely as written. You gotta interact with the community, and that's honestly, what I'm going to tell you is one of the best ways to learn how to run any of these modules. Join these discords, join these subreddits, you are going to hear from everybody, from all these thousands and thousands and thousands of people we have in all these communities, what worked and what didn't work. And you're going to see this natural consensus. You're going to see people that ran this one adventure, they're all going to say, oh yeah, that one part, you have to change it to make it more fun. Or hey, that part right there, leave it as is, you know. And of course, you'll get a lot of differing opinions, but that's the best part about having those communities is if you have enough voices out there, you see which one you think you pick up most on and you take it and you run with it. And of course, you know, it's highly encouraged to make these adventures your own. I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you don't run any module as written ever. Chris Perkins himself says not to do that, right? The guy who actually writes these adventures tells you not to run these as written. And I wholeheartedly agree. Don't run these adventures, run your adventures. These players that show up to your table do not show up to play any adventure. They show up to play your adventure. So give it to them. Using these, you are going to craft your own adventure and it's going to be fan-freaking-tastic. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, right? That is going to be the list for me there and the ratings and all that fun stuff. So that is going to do it for me. If you disagree with what I have to say, go ahead and tell me. I'm curious what people would put where. You know, I'm curious to see if people think that Prince of the Apocalypse deserves an A or an S. I'm curious to see if people think that Tomb of Annihilation isn't as great. I'm willing to bet that a lot of people would put Curse of Strahd first. But, you know, people do what they do. Yeah, tell me all those things because I want to know. Tell me how you make all of these adventures your own. I would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.